The most critical region in the Russia-Ukraine war is without a doubt Crimea. While the Russian army is struggling not to lose Crimea, which it occupied in 2014, the Ukrainian army is fighting to reclaim its territory from the occupiers. When Russian leader Vladimir Putin failed to succeed in his plan to invade Ukraine, which he launched last year, he found himself in a position to lose Crimea because the successful attacks of the Ukrainian army have reached as far as Crimea. Putin wants to dominate the seas by maintaining his presence in Crimea, so much so that the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian occupiers is located on the Crimean Peninsula. In addition, the ports in this region play an important role in international trade. But Putin is getting closer to losing his presence in Crimea because the Ukrainian army's attacks on Crimea are increasing day by day. Since the beginning of the war, Ukrainian leader Zelensky has repeatedly stated that Crimea will be liberated from the occupiers. The developments in Crimea demonstrate Zelensky's determination and the success of the Ukrainian army. The pulse of the Russian-Ukrainian war continues to beat in Crimea. The Ukrainian Air Force is constantly monitoring the targets of the occupiers in Crimea. The areas detected by reconnaissance drones are hit by unmanned aerial vehicles and missiles. The air base of the occupiers in Crimea was shaken by the attack of Ukrainian drones the other day. Moreover, the air base housed a Su-24 attack aircraft, which are of great importance for the Russian army. Before we reveal the details about the attack on the air base of the Russian occupiers in Crimea, we have a request for you as an ALA news team. We continue to report all the developments in the Russia-Ukraine war with our understanding of accurate and impartial reporting. You can click on the Super Thanks button to support our teammates who work hard in the preparation of these reports and contribute to the continuation of the reports without interruption. The base of the Russian invaders was hit by Ukrainian drones. The attack was carried out in the morning. The Ukrainian Air Force detected the invaders' airbase with reconnaissance drones flown before the attack. The coordinates of the area were recorded. The next step was to carry out the attack. Ukrainian drones were flown to strike the airbase in Crimea. Upon reaching the area, the drones successfully hit the targeted points. The images shared after the attack show the intensity of the explosions. In the images shared on social media after the airbase of the Russian invaders was hit, huge clouds of smoke were seen in the city of Gorodetskoy in the Simferopol Rayon. Residents of the area, located kilometers away from the airbase, said that the windows of their houses were shaking. The sound of the explosions was heard in many parts of Crimea. One of the most important reasons for the intensity of the explosions at the airbase was the Su-24 attack aircrafts that the Russian occupiers had stationed at the airbase. Builds during the Soviet Union to offer an attack aircraft plays a major role in the Russian Air Force's airstrikes against Ukraine. The Russian army, which was about to lose its ammunition stock as a result of the Ukrainian army's attacks, suffered another major loss with the latest attack. No information on the number of aircraft at the airbase in Crimea has been shared, but the intensity of the explosions indicates that the number of aircraft is high. Ukrainian authorities have not yet made a statement about the attack on the Russian airbase. The statement made by Russia concealed the facts. Russian authorities have been making false statements to hide the losses they have suffered since the war began because they don't want to accept their losses against Ukraine. This was also the case with the attack on the military base. Sergei Aksionov, the Russian occupation official in charge of Crimea, made statements about the attack on the airbase in Goverdyskoy that concealed the facts. Aksionov said that a Ukrainian drone was shot down in the airbase area. According to Aksionov, the drone crashed in a field and there was no damage or loss of life. However, statements by locals close to the area and footage shared on social media revealed that Aksionov's statements were not true. While the Ukrainian army was targeting the occupiers in Crimea, there was a new development in Russia. A natural gas pipeline in the city of Pelham in Russia's Sverdlovsk Oblast exploded. A big fire broke out after the explosion. One of Russia's most important natural gas companies made a statement about the explosion. According to the statement, the explosion and the natural gas pipeline occurred at 6:37 p.m. Many posts containing images of the explosion were shared on social media. The severity of the fire is clearly visible in the images. The fact that the fire broke out in a natural gas pipeline increases this intensity even more. In the video, shared flames rising tens of meters upwards draw attention. No statement has been made about the explosion in the city of Pelham. But as always, these explosions brought to mind Ukrainian partisan groups because partisan groups have organized many attacks on Russian territory by crossing the occupied territories. The aim of these attacks was not to harm the civilian population like the Russian occupiers. The partisans attacked military bases, airports, gathering and administrative centers belonging to the occupying Russian army and many points that would cause economic damage to Russia. The Russian army has been powerless against the Ukrainian army, which has been strengthened with the support of Western and European countries. One of the biggest reasons for the loss of power of the Russian army is the problems within the army and the Russian soldiers who do not want to fight. The Russian army includes many different groups within its structure. The most well-known of these are the Wagner Group soldiers and the soldiers loyal to Chechen leader Kadyrov. The conflict between Russian army soldiers, Wagner Group soldiers and Chechen soldiers loyal to Kadyrov is constantly increasing. The Wagner Group started to disagree with the Russian army, especially after its operations in Bakhmut, because the Wagner Group had held victory celebrations in this region without the knowledge of the Russian army, and the clashes in the region were also continuing. Making victory declarations independently of the official army was the end of Prigozhin, so much so that the leader of the Wagner Group, Yevgeny Prigozhin, is having serious problems with the Russian chief of the general staff, Valery Gerasimov, and the Russian defense minister, Sergei Shoigu. Wagner Group soldiers do not listen to the orders of Russian army commanders, while Kadyrov's Chechen soldiers are constantly humiliated for their race and beliefs. Russian leader Vladimir Putin, unable to solve the problems in the army, is also facing a true problem. The number of soldiers in the Russian army is decreasing day by day. Every day, around 1,000 Russian soldiers die as a result of the attacks by the Ukrainian army. That being said, about 10,000 Russian soldiers have surrendered to the Ukrainian army since the beginning of the war. Russian youths do not want to die for Putin's own political career. The Russian people continue their protests for an end to the war. It seems to be very difficult for Putin, who is cornered every day in the face of all these problems, to continue the war for a long time. The war in Ukraine reshaped the military, political, and economic balances all over the world in this war. The countries of the world determined their ranks in a short time. Ukraine's allies in Eastern Europe have also begun to step up security measures against the aggressive policies of the Russians. From the moment Russia signaled that it would invade Ukraine, the world focused on one question. We can say that the answer to this question is a candidate to determine the long-term fate not only of the wall, but of Europe and the rest of the world. As Russia's attempt to invade Ukraine has almost completed its first year, things are not going as the Kremlin had long hoped. While almost everyone in the world predicted that the Russian army would enter Kiev in a few days, Ukraine's formidable resistance and massive support and sanctions in which much of the world participated thwarted Moscow's plans. Contrary to Putin's expectations, the West gave an unprecedented response to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. How could Putin be so wrong? Putin's exaggeration of Russia's military might and his underestimation of Ukraine's resistance are part of the answer. But most importantly, he misread the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin believed in the idea that the West would abandon Ukraine to its fate based on his experience of the weak reaction of the international community. Given Europe's concern about Washington's commitment to European security, both in the wake of the Trump presidency and the Biden administration's withdrawal from Afghanistan. The Moscow administration has argued that the Russian invasion will divide the United States and its European allies and set up a puppet government in Kiev. It was planned that he could achieve a strategic victory had Putin studied better how Western democracies are responding to solemn threats to their own security. He would have realized how wrong these assumptions were. Russia did not anticipate that it would react swiftly, decisively, and vigorously when the Western democracies were pressed on the tail. The Ukraine war is a conflict that has not only regional but also global effects, as it has the potential to trigger geopolitical fault lines in the world. It has already begun to shape alliances around the world. Countries whose economies have been crushed by the rising inflation expect peace as soon as possible and energy and food prices to return to normal levels. A group of NATO member countries led by the USA, Britain and Poland, and countries that have historical accounts with Russia, such as Japan, seek to wear Moscow militarily and economically to the last possible point. With Russia's ongoing invasion of Ukraine, Vladimir Putin has tried to portray himself in a god complex by comparing himself to the famous imperialist Peter the Great. Putin tried to convince the non-Western world that he would bring back multipolarity. Although Vladimir Putin used false excuses to invade Ukraine, he directed most of the Russian autocratic war rhetoric mostly to Western governments. The Russian president sought to form a coalition of countries willing to fight the West to bring the multipolar world upside down with the aim of overthrowing the long-standing American hegemony. These ambitions were too small, to say the least, as the people he thought were allies did not support his war in the way he thought. In the early stages of the war, Putin tried to persuade member states such as Kazakhstan and Belarus to formally send troops and participate in the invasion. While the Russian media portrayed this war as Moscow's coalition against NATO, it was also a call to action for its allies to intervene. Accordingly, Belarusian dictator Alexander Lukashenko became aware of Russian military operations during his occupation. Tens of thousands of Russian troops flowed into Ukraine from Belarus borders, allowing the Kremlin to use this country as a launching pad. Despite the logistical support, Lukashenko formally hesitates to intervene. Putin tried many times to persuade Belarus to join, but without success. On the other hand, another pillar of Putin's collapsed. North Korea has supported the fake proxies of the Donbass, but it also firmly states that it will not help the Russian invasion, feeling the need to take precautions in the face of the situation, which is seen as a part of hostile attempts to damage North Korea's image in the international arena. North Korea once again reiterated that they have never exchanged arms with Russia and that it has no such plans to do that in the future. Also, since the country remains isolated from the international community with one of the worst economies in the world, we can say that their support means nothing in conflict. In short, the Russian leader did not get the support he expected from his allies. The splendor of Putin's personal ego and the support he envisioned turned out to be the opposite of what he had expected. The Russian leader was also largely alone on the diplomatic front. The international community turned to Russia in order to prove Russia's injustice many times before the world public opinion to adopt the sanctions placed on Russia by Western countries, by other countries to increase the price Russia paid for the occupation and to prevent another country from violating international law in a similar way. In conclusion, setting a precedent for the occupation of Ukraine by Russia carries serious risks for the theme of the international system in peace. This situation causes many states, especially Russia's allies, to worry about providing a peaceful environment. It seems that even if Russia achieves its military goals as a result of the Ukraine war, it will have to continue on its way as an excluded and weakened actor in the world economy and politics. Instead of dividing the West, Putin's attack on Ukraine has united the West. The United States and its allies joined forces to impose a comprehensive sanctions regime on Russia, making Russia the most sanctioned country in the world. Western countries also mobilized politically against Russia, and the West's military response was equally impressive. Instead of withdrawing forces from Eastern Europe, as Putin had requested, NATO has doubled its military presence in the region by mobilizing the Emergency Response Force. More than 35 countries have increased their arms shipments to Ukraine. Historically, even the most reluctant countries to engage in international conflicts have joined the sanctions. Switzerland and Singapore imposed economic sanctions on Russia. Known for its strict immigration policy, Japan has opened its doors to Ukrainians fleeing their country. Most importantly, German Chancellor Scholz announced that his country would provide military assistance to Ukraine, increase defense spending in line with NATO commitments, set up a €100 billion defense fund to modernize its obsolete army, and promised to quickly end its dependence on Russia in energy. The West has tried to respond together against the possible invasion of Russia. Top U.S. intelligence officials briefed their allies about Putin's plans and shared sensitive information that even senior U.S. officials would not normally see. Western diplomats met with their colleagues to plan possible sanctions packages. US commanders met with NATO and other allies to discuss how to improve preparedness and how to design possible security assistance for Ukraine. This painstaking diplomacy also disproved Vladimir Putin's belief that making demands on the allies could backfire. Looking at the point reached, Putin will undoubtedly try to exploit the divisions within the alliance. Disagreements may arise about what steps to take or what concessions to offer. The burden of punishing Russia will inevitably fall unevenly between countries, which can fuel conflicts. Solving these challenges will require skillful diplomacy, as leaders in Washington, Brussels, Tokyo, and other capitals tackle such problems. They seek to formalize the cooperation sparked by Putin's brutality, forming the core of a new alliance of democracies that many have long demanded. Accordingly, in the coming years, there will be more geopolitical threats, such as Russia's possible pursuit of revenge, and the major democracies will have to counter them with institutionalized cooperation. Western countries should enhance their mutual defenses and deepen their economic relations, including the United States and the EU. In the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for the Trans-Pacific Partnership and negotiating a transatlantic trade and investment agreement as a first step, they should expand the G7 to include Australia, South Korea, and the European Union. This will bring together the leading advanced democracies of North America, Europe, and Asia under one roof and provide a powerful counterweight to the oppression that is plaguing all democratic countries. The West must now roll up its sleeves for a longer struggle. There are a lot of updates from the Luhansk region. Here, Russians launched an intense series of assaults to push Ukrainians from the eastern bank of the river and launched extensive artillery preparation on Kupiansk, causing mass evacuation of the city in preparation for the storming operation. However, it looks like all these efforts were in vain because they failed to secure their flanks, which invited Ukrainian counterattacks and rendered the storming of Kupiansk infeasible. Last time we talked about this region, I told you that Russian forces breached the Ukrainian defense in Anakiva and started moving south along the river in an attempt to clear the eastern bank and secure the flanks before they moved in more forces for an attack on Kupiansk. I also told you that the main idea of such actions is to cut supplies to the Slivka group and collapse the front line towards the Oskil River. Many sources brought attention to the fact that Ukrainian officials have ordered the mandatory evacuation of vulnerable civilians from Kupiansk, which brought about speculations that Ukrainians are preparing to abandon this city. However, the reported Ukrainian evacuation of vulnerable citizens does not suggest that the Ukrainian forces believe that the Russians threaten the city. In fact, Russian sources have been continuously reporting about extensive Ukrainian presence in the region and stable supplies of ammunition. Ukrainians started evacuation because the Russians launched heavy artillery preparation and destroyed and damaged many civilian areas. However, Russian forces were unable to capitalize on this artillery preparation as they visibly got stuck in the forest. Russians tried to move towards the outer edges of the forest but could not secure any gains due to mines and artillery strikes. As Ukrainian snowbird, they planted mines. They continue assaulting Russian positions in the forest. Recent reports suggest that once Russians entered Lemon Parish, which was previously a gray zone, Ukrainians started increasingly targeting this settlement. Even the fights in Chernihiv could continue to this day because Ukrainians launch assaults from Dvorichna through the forest. Securing this flank is a necessity for Russians. Otherwise, they cannot deploy additional troops to conduct an offensive towards Kupiansk, cutting supplies to the Slivka group and collapsing the front line. The Institute for the Study of War commented on this situation and stated that in order to threaten the city, Russians need to advance 13 kilometers cross-country rapidly, and the failure to secure their gains in the forest showed that they do not have the capacity to do it. Ukrainian General Staff concluded that the only objective that Russians are achieving here is fixing Ukrainian forces in the Kupiansk direction and preventing Ukrainian forces from transferring personnel to other areas in Ukraine. As you remember, Putin ordered to defeat Ukrainian forces in eastern Ukraine and capture Luhansk and Donetsk regions by March. Judging by what has happened, Russian forces tried to breach Ukrainian defense in order to disperse Ukrainian troops, take Bakhmut, and then commit the resources to take Kupiansk and Lyman. The almost unnoticeable changes to the front line make many doubt that the offensive operation happened at all. However, the engagement of significant elements of at least 3 major Russian divisions on this front line indicates that the Russian winter offensive happened. Ukrainian forces just prevented Russians from securing significant gains. Donetsk People's Republic commander Khodakovsky questioned whether Russian forces are prepared for the coming Ukrainian counteroffensive operations after, quote, getting carried away by Bakhmut and Volodar, and suggested that Russian forces may have set conditions for Ukrainian counteroffensives by heavily expanding combat power and resources on these operations. The conventional Russian military recently massed and lost significant number of mobilized personnel for a 6-culminated offensive push near Volodar. The Marine brigades were even merged together due to losses. Russian major offensives in the Luhansk region failed to generate any significant results, and Russians are still fighting in Bakhmut. The Institute for the Study of War estimates that the culmination of Russia's current 3 offensive efforts will likely allow Ukrainian forces to launch counteroffensives anywhere along the front line. It looks like Putin has overestimated the Russian military's own capabilities and the extent to which mobilized soldiers will play a role given the current state of the Russian army. The most realistic plan would have required anywhere from 6 to 12 months of several phases of successful Russian campaigning. As of now, the intensity of vice remains high only around Crimea and Bakhmut, which implies that the Russian offensive has prematurely culminated, and Russian forces' culmination could generate favorable conditions for Ukrainian forces to exploit in their own late spring or summer counteroffensive. After incorporating Western deliveries of weapons and newly built and trained assault formations,